Hello, my name is Lindsay Compton, and I'm the Education and Public Programs Manager for the Society of Illustrators. Thank you for being here for Smahtguy, The Life and Times of Barney Frank, Eric Orner, and Alison Bechdel in Conversation. I also want to give a thank you to Metropolitan Books for helping to organize this event. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and there will be time at the end to answer a few. I also want to mention that the book is available to order through Strand Bookstore and shipping will begin tomorrow, so I'll put a link for that in the chat. I'm going to get things started by introducing both Eric and Alison. Eric Orner is a former congressional aide to Barney Frank and the acclaimed author of the mostly unfabulous social life of Ethan Green, one of the country's first and longest running gay comic strips. A feature film of the same title appeared in 2005, the same year that Orner retired the comic strip. Orner has also published comic strips and illustration in the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the New Republic. His cartoon story, Weekends Abroad, was included in Houghton Mifflin's Best American Comics 2011. Alison Bechdel's work includes the long-running comic strip Dykes to Watch Out For, as well as the graphic memoirs Fun Home, Are You My Mother, The Secret of Superhuman Strength, but she is best known in some quarters for being the originator of the Bechdel test. The stage musical adaptation of Fun Home premiered on Broadway in 2015 and received 5 Tony Awards. Bechdel is the recipient of an Eisner and MacArthur Fellowship. Alison, if you want to get started.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to discuss Smahtguy. I'm so excited to talk about this book with Eric, but it's a pity to just talk about comics. So before we start yakking, Eric is going to show us some of the book and read from it. So we will come back and chat later. First, a reading.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Alison. Thank you to the Society of Illustrators, a great New York institution, for offering me this opportunity to share Smahtguy with you. Thanks to the Strand Bookstore, another great institution, for their kindness, and to the singular Alison Bechdel for her huge talent and generosity, which extends way back for me, not just for tonight, where I've enlisted her help. So I'm going to do a quick reading in 2 different parts. And I'm going to move back and forth in time a little bit, but I'll flag that for you at the start of each section I read. And one additional note, Smahtguy is about the rough and tumble of politics. And some of the language can be pretty coarse. So apologies up front for that. But I wanted you to know what this world sounds like, as well as looks like, at least to my ear. So here goes, and bear with me while I navigate the share screen business. Oh, Lindsay, it says host disabled, participant screen sharing.
You guys were like troubleshooting this for an hour.
Absolutely. There we go. There we go.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Got it. Okay. Bear with me. I mean, Alison, you could troubleshoot it for 3 hours with me and I would still get it wrong. But here goes.
I'm just so glad it's you and not me.
1989, prologue. They were hot, hungry, and pissed. Not the way you want the National Press Corps to be. They'd been encamped in front of his apartment ever since the Washington Times, DC's moony rag masquerading as a real newspaper, broke the story at 5 a.m. His car was still in the Capitol's underground lot, which meant he'd have to face the scrum, if only for the 30-foot walk to the curb to catch a cab. Assuming he could get a fucking cab, never a safe bet in DC. The most nightmarish part was his own stupidity. It cut more deeply than the humiliation. Yo, Congressman, can we get a statement? Fucking hot out here. They'd all agreed, the people he trusted most, that he'd have to answer all this shit publicly. But not today, not here on the Hill with the hounds yapping and baying in this insufferable August heat. He'd go back to Massachusetts. He'd face them there, at home. Congressman, how could you have been so stupid? How much time do you have? 1974. Ferrer shakes. It's a racist goddamn town, Barney. You know as well as I. You've got a single goddamn black guy, Catholic, of course, who's the only one you people have been willing to appoint to a board of commission for like 30 years. You people, what the fuck, Kay? You know how hard Kevin worked. Shit, how hard I worked to appoint. Yeah, well, work on this. Why the hell don't we have a single black person in the state Senate when there's enough black folks in Massachusetts to make up at least 2 goddamn seats? Because the system's as rigged up here in the Northeast as it is down South, it just gets better PR. That's right, Hackensack. Bayonne. Don't correct me when I'm agreeing with you. Once a decade, state legislatures following the national census redraw political district lines to reflect a state's shifts in population. If more people leave the city for the suburbs, redistricting allocates the suburbs more representatives in Congress and the State House. If there are more African Americans in the state now than there were 10 years ago, then district lines are redrawn to enable more political representation for African Americans. But that's not the way it works back in the day in Massachusetts, when the legislative bosses came up with a redistricting plan to quash black hopes. Diminutive and dictatorial, State Senate President Billy Bulger wanted to keep just enough black Bostonians in his district to scare away white opponents. Don't get any big ideas about running against me. We'll split the vote and elect you know who. When Barney agreed to fight for a black Senate seat, Bulger was pissed. I most definitively do not appreciate this newly elected Harvard loudmouth goody two-shoes radical sticking his fat nose in the business of drawing the Commonwealth's legislative districts. Some of Barney's fellow liberals refused to help, afraid of Bulger and his older brother Whitey, a one-man crime wave responsible for much of the narcotics trafficking, numbers running, racketeering, bank robbery, and general thuggery going on between the Tobin Bridge and Providence, Rhode Island. Assholes. These district lines are drawn to maintain neighborhood cohesion for the benefit of all Bay Staters. These district lines, Mr. Speaker, have as much cohesion as the Austro-Hungarian Empire. For whatever reason, Barney wasn't easily intimidated by demagoguery or much else. Should we call the cops? Might have been them who sent it. When Bulger's boys rammed through a bill excluding more black representation from the Senate, it was vetoed by the fair-minded Republican governor at the time. Incensed, the bosses appealed to party loyalty, demanded that all Democrats vote to override the GOP governor's veto. To Barney, though, and the other liberals he'd helped persuade, it was a no-brainer. I'll vote for a Republican plan any day of the week, Mr. Speaker, before I vote for a racist one. Capiche? There was a long impasse, but when the dust settled, he and his allies forced the legislature to create a seat in the state Senate for an African American. He wouldn't have the same kind of success with gay rights. Surprisingly, when his bill to repeal the Commonwealth's criminalization of sodomy came to a vote, a majority seemed to be in favor. Goodness gracious, the ayes have it. The big electronic board near the speaker's podium displayed over 200 little green lights, all signifying representatives voting with him. He and his fellow liberals were astonished, thinking the House had just unceremoniously voted to decriminalize sex between same-sex partners. But then, having had their bit of frat boy fun, the hacks, ward healers, and stooges changed their vote en masse to no. Oh, wait, my mistake. It's the nays that have it after all. Which meant the sodomy statute, a relic from the Commonwealth's bad old witch burning days, remained intact. Hey, Barney, I heard your butt fucking bill went down to a resounding defeat. His response was just to file a second gay rights bill. a bill to prohibit discrimination based on sexual preference in housing, employment, and public accommodations. At the hearing, he was apprehensive when a young Black representative stood up to speak. Many Black elders considered homosexuality a sin back then and wanted nothing to do with what they held to be an immoral gay rights movement. Abomination. But Barney needn't have worried. I've been dealing with job discrimination based on prejudice for a long time. And I think it's just as wrong when it's directed at gay people as I do when it's directed at Black people. Mr. Speaker, I support Representative Frank's bill. So that's all I have for the first reading.
Eric, what a treat to hear you read. I don't think I've ever heard you read. I mean, you write brilliant dialogue, but you're also an actor.
Well, I don't know about that, but well, I did learn one, in one of my many employment stints, I worked as a storyboard artist at Disney, and they would like yell at you to like pitch the board, and there was a goal that or there was a thought that even if the material is lousy, and I'm not saying it isn't, that you could, if you acted it out,
just talk your way through it.
Maybe. So I do, and these are the voices I hear in my head anyway. So anyway, I hope.
Well, that was delightful.
Thank you.
Well, so I'm very excited to be here talking about this book with you. I've known Eric for a very long time, since we both had our comic strips in LGBT newspapers back in the 90s. And I was always mystified by how Eric, it took me all my available time to put out my comic strip. Eric also worked for a congressman and did his comic strip. I was just always baffled by that and amazed. And now this has sort of come of it. But Eric, can you just tell us, how did you manage these two different worlds, like this introverted, life of the cartoonist and this, I assume, extroverted life of being a congressional staffer? And how did you get all your work done? And how did you start working for Barney?
Mostly, I guess the way I explain this, I do have the way I explain this to people is drawing, cartooning, illustrating, animating. That's my business. Law, politics, government, that's been for many, many years my family's business. It's just what I grew up in. Like a kid who wants to be a singer, but whose dad owns a Pontiac dealership. You somehow know how to sell Pontiacs. And there were times where my business was doing well. I had the Mostly Unfabulous Social Life of Ethan Green and books from St. Martin's Press, and I wound up storyboarding at Disney. But there are other times where art wasn't paying the bills, and I turned to the other. And where I draw well by choice, I'm good at the other stuff by osmosis. Like I said, I grew up in a very political Chicago family. It was the kind of household where a kid just learned how to write a press release or draft talking points or turn petitions into the county clerk that weren't going to get thrown out on a technicality. And the odd thing is, when I first met Barney many years ago at an event in Boston, somebody was kind enough to introduce me to him, and they said, "This is the guy that draws cartoons." I was drawing cartoons for the Boston Phoenix back then, the great alt weekly. Mm-hmm. And he remembered a cartoon that I had done that week, lambasting the city's cardinal at the time, Cardinal Bernard Law, for his abhorrent policies on AIDS. And Barney said something like, "Good cartoon, like the message. If you ever need something else to do, give my office a call. Maybe we'll put you to work." And he was pressing, and the thought that being a cartoonist sometimes does mean you need something else to do, to pay your rent. And so I did give him a call, and he did put me to work 3 separate times over the next 25 years. And so it's been the way I look at it is it's a day job or a plan B, always secondary to my real avocation, which is drawing. Sorry,
Okay.
long speech.
No, that's what I wanted to know. Eric, I'm so glad you started with reading that prologue about the moment of the scandal erupting. I think that was really brilliant to start the book. That's the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
Sure. Otherwise we'd all be like waiting around and wondering how that was going to figure in. Were you going to mention it?
Right. Right.
And it would be very distracting, I think, from the real story of Frank's life. Was it hard to arrive at that decision, or were you clear from the get-go that that's how you were going to start?
It wasn't clear from the get-go, but honestly, the very first day I sat down to start drawing, and I don't really draw anything unless I write it all out first. I don't know, and I always did that even before I worked in animation. I'm a big believer in having this screenplay. And then as an artist, I mean, we're not filming it, we're drawing it. But as far as I'm concerned, same difference.
Yeah.
And I don't want to waste film or drawing time. So I locked the script. But it wasn't at the beginning in the script. But the very first day I sat down to draw it, I thought, oh, I should move this around. I should start here. And the funny thing is, in real life, I was working for Barney then as an intern. And it was the summer, and I was, a lowly intern, and I had a day off. And I was also like a young gay guy, and I did what young gay guys do in Boston on their day off. I loaded the car up with my beach towel and reading material, because I like to read, and drove to Provincetown, which is a 3-hour drive. I got in the car I grabbed the newspaper, I got in the car. It took me 3.5 hours to get to P-Town. I got to the beach, I folded my towel, I opened the newspaper to see that my boss was literally all over the front page. And that was my, and of course, then I had to find a payphone to call like, the staff director to say like, am I supposed to be back at work? So anyway, I don't know if that's a funny story or not, but that's what goes through my head.
Can I just, I'm not clear on the timing, but he had come out at that point, right? And this happened a little after that.
Yes, I mean, it's a sort of a sticky point in the sort of the history of when, for this book and in general, people want to know, are you the first this or that? And people have a tendency to call him the first out congressman. It's a little more complicated than that. He came out in 1987 voluntarily, happily, really triumphantly. It was, and back in the day, now it's routine, but back in the day, it was not. It really rocked the political landscape and was a milestone. Sitting.
Were you working for him at that point?
No.
Okay.
No, I wasn't. That was 87. But then in 89, this scandal broke. The scandal was news of his having had a relationship with a sex worker in 84 and 85. So he had ended the relationships with the sex worker. He had met somebody and began a happier personal journey. and came out. But then his past caught up with him a couple years later. So, and then there's one more wrinkle, and that is that there was a series of scandals, I think in '86, involving a different member of Congress who I still have great affection and respect for, Gary Studs, who was also gay and came out because he got caught with a person who worked for the House. So he had come out before Barney, but he came out during a scandal. Barney came out happily without a scandal, but then the scandal came back and caught him. So you can tell, even like, I mean, this is my business. I should be able to tell this in a less convoluted way, and yet it's head-spittingly convoluted.
It is. Well, the book just does such a wonderful job of showing what it was like to be closeted and gay in the early 60s at Harvard, and then in the political world. It was just impossible. Frank could not have had a career, and he knew that. Right. I love the way you suggest, at least to some extent, that Barney's incredible work ethic was perhaps a kind of sublimation. Like, you can't have a personal life, you can't have sex, you can't have romance. So he would just work. He would just like read bills and pass legislation. It was very, very moving, and to see the level of loneliness that started to creep up on him in his life. Was that the story of this book for you? Like, I love biographies. I love the way, like, a biography is a picture of someone's life, and their life has meaning and their life has a narrative arc. Did you feel like you could see that going into this project, or did that evolve as you wrote?
Well, I guess it was not the story of the book for me, but because I can do a quick segue and tell you what I think the story of the book is, but it touches on the things that you mentioned. The reason Barney couldn't do any of the things that you mentioned, couldn't have a career, couldn't be engaged in public policy, couldn't be effective in advocating for the sort of world that he wanted within the political system, which is his personality, is because he was gay. He could have taken a different career route and been one of the people who, a lot of us admire so greatly. Could have been an activist. Some of my heroes, and I'm sure yours, are the great activists of the gay rights movement. Sylvia Rivera, Frank Kameny. But these people, their skill set wasn't, if we put this appropriation into this bill, we affect this program, which will impact beneficially these 100,000 people. That's not what those people, those activists, were good at. And that is what Barney was good at. And Barney was correct in thinking that he couldn't do that and be out. And the story of the book to me is, as much as I have tremendous admiration for those people, and of course the great example of the person who sort of blurs the line is Harvey Milk, because he was an activist who then actually got elected. But people are so disappointed in politics right now, and so exhausted and disgusted and disbelieving in it, that they, I think that really strong political work isn't recognized in our society right now. People people don't have any idea what the hell these people do up there. And if they think anything, they think they do nothing.
Yeah.
And that upset me. Um, and so, to take nothing away from the activists, the story of the book to me was, here's an example of a person who toiled in those, in those hearing rooms, in those committee rooms, and reading those bills to build a better society. And I know people don't believe in that anymore, but frankly, I think it's our only choice. Otherwise you have two people in a room or one person in a room making decisions for entire societies, and you see what we have. Since February, we've been living through an excellent example in the Ukraine of what happens when people turn their back on politics.
Yeah.
So to me, politics isn't a dirty word. There are admirable people, flawed people, absolutely, but admirable people toiling in it. And that's the story of the book.
Yeah, no, it's deeply inspirational and very tonic. You've got to read this book. It will make you feel, it will cleanse you of all the just disgust that you're feeling toward politics right now.
I'm grateful to you for saying so.
I mean, yeah, it's very inspiring, the kind of work he did. And I realized as I was reading this book that he was very intersectional in his politics long before we had that word. He was working on schools and housing and race issues and abortion and economic stuff. Right. It wasn't, gay stuff was in there, but it was by no means the focus. He was fighting for equality for everyone in a really inspiring way.
Thank you. Absolutely. And the thing is, you're right. I mean, he was, that's sort of why I started out with the piece. I know, people aren't necessarily wildly interested in what happened in the Massachusetts legislature in 1970, but Barney was working for voting rights, specifically for African Americans, long before LGBT rights. There was no such thing as LGBT rights. He wouldn't have, and I don't think he felt, and I think he had a lot of company, that his life was worthy of those rights. And in that sense, all of us owe a great debt of gratitude, an unpayable debt of gratitude to the people I was talking about in the flip side of my equation, the activists. Had you not had Frank Kameny standing out with his lonely sign in front of the White House in 1961, where you can sort of imagine Jack and Bobby, opening the curtains and looking out at Pennsylvania Avenue and giggling because there's this fag with a sign. The course of history wouldn't be what it is now, and Barney wouldn't have had a chance to do the good work that he did.
The other thing about Barney is that unlike a lot of closeted politicians who, perpetrate horrible anti-gay legislation, he stood up for gay rights before he was even out. That's right. That's just so admirable.
Right. Thank you. And there are parts in my book, and I should say, doing this book was always, yes, I worked for him, and yes, I admire him, but like the rest of us, he's got plenty of flaws, and the book wasn't going to be interesting unless I dwelled on them. Yeah. And having been one of his staffers and the recipient of him getting mad, pretty regularly, I didn't want to write a book about hagiography or a hagiographic book.
I was going to ask you about that, because obviously it's I guess what you would call an authorized biography. You knew you were writing it and presumably was on board with that. So how did you gauge? I mean, if he weren't going to see this book for some reason, would it have been any different, do you think? Or Or were
Well, I mean, I should say it wasn't, is my understanding, you probably know better than me. It's not an authorized biography in the sense that he had no right of like approval over it.
Mhm.
He didn't even see it until it was done. And actually, you know, that was, I drew for 3 years and then got to the last page and said to myself, oh, geez, like, what if he hates it? Like, you know,
You didn't show
that,
it to him till it was done?
that would just suck. No, I was standing in a FedEx place because, you know, try, you know, I mean, you know, he's not a, you know, a millennial hipster. So trying to walk him through downloading, you know, an 8,000 ton PDF that were, you know, wasn't going to work. So I had to put it in the mail and send it to him. And it occurred to me that, you know, gosh, I could have like at least shown him halfway to make sure that he's not going to be absolutely horrified. So that was a 3-day, you know, bit of upset. But like I say, it wasn't authorized in the sense that he had no right of like approval or not approval. I did show it to him before it went to the publisher, and in his like inimical fashion, he had like 27 corrections. One including like at some point I show the contents of his mother's purse strewn on her bed. And I don't know, just to be a wise ass, I had a copy of what's the racing paper, the Daily Racing Journal for horse racing. And his aunts liked to gamble, but he wrote back, my mother never gambled. So I had to quickly change that to like, you know, I think I turned it into a book and made it Our Bodies, Ourselves. And that satisfied him.
I love the character of his mother. She kind of is a through line through the book, and you just, she's magical.
Well, his mother, Elsie Frank, was a force in her own right in Massachusetts. And, you know, I think of her a lot now because, you know, as people my age, many of our parents are getting older. And many of my friends have lost parents, and, you know, elder rights become something you're thinking a lot more about, like, you know, how are they being treated in an assisted living facility? And Elsie Frank really was a pioneer of elder rights, and she was a force to be reckoned with in Massachusetts and then nationally. Legislators quaked in their boots when she showed up at a hearing, you know, with a bullhorn you know, to advocate on their behalf. So she was something.
Well, she's just a wonderful dimension of the book, and there's just so much richness like that throughout the book. You know, you're not just telling this linear story of Frank's life. This book is jammed with scenes and characters and jokes, and you know, it's much more rich and dense than it needed to be. You know, you didn't have to do that. I love how you just lavish your drawing energy on whatever you're writing about in a really wonderful way. And that's something I remember from the Ethan Green days, and that I loved about your comic strip. There's just always so much going on, and I wanted to, you like encouraged me to do that too. Like I was sort of competitive with you. Like, I want to make my strip richer and more complex because Eric is doing that. So just a little aside there. Thank you for that spur.
Well, your strip was, you know, your strip was rolled out like a you know, each week like an Academy Award winning movie to me. It was as rich as could be. And you know, an ensemble cast, all of whom were, you know, fully realized. And
well, wait, okay, let's talk about this parallel to movies, because I think that's
Yeah.
interesting. You know, you have an author's note at the beginning saying that consider this book a dramatization, and you just meant it's not strictly following the chronology sometimes, and you've got to make up conversations here and there, but also you really do dramatize things. Your characters are acting, they're alive, they've got expressions and feeling. You have them with business, like an actor on a stage. Like there's this hilarious scene where I mean, it happens throughout the book, but one scene I remember in particular is Barney, when he's working in the mayor's office, this gay man comes in to complain about police abuse, and Barney's not out yet, and he's really nervous about this gay man coming into the office, and he's playing with all these things on the desk, papers and the whiteout, and he ends up like shooting a staple across the room, and it's just like this funny business that's going on that I'm sure took a lot of time to draw, and you didn't need to do. So,
well, you know, I do think of it as, I've always started drawing as I get, well, I've already said this, but I think of it as like filming. And, you know, a camera, you know, a movie that, you know, there's stuff in the background. There's stuff, you know, there's things on the sides of the screen. You know, the world doesn't stop just for, you know, for the central image, if they're in an environment. And to me in particular, you know, I have a great love of Boston, and Boston was really a character in the book. And I could, you know, that was one of the, it was an interesting exercise in drawing one city that you love and like to immerse yourself in, and then another city, the second half of the book, DC, where admittedly, like, I have none of those feelings for, and having to be careful, you know, not allow the second half of the book to be without the richness of the first half.
Did you have to force yourself to draw DC landmarks, and you didn't enjoy that?
You know, it was really like, the thing is, I guess the best way I can put it, Boston's funny and DC isn't. DC's a lot of things. It's just not funny. Smahtguy, you know, just at the kickoff, you know, at once, you know, there's a scene in the book where, you know, a neighbor is saying like, my kid's school's got broken windows. The starlings make nests in the kid's hair. Like, that's not the way people in DC talk. And so DC doesn't make me laugh the way Boston does. But I found ways of making DC my DC. I reminded myself, because I did work as a staffer for him during the Great Recession. The last time I worked for him, I got laid off from my job storyboarding at Disney, which was my great chance to, you know, to earn a very good living drawing. What I hadn't built into the equation is drawing what? I was drawing Tinkerbell. And it was, you know, you see the movies, like old movies of like Greek galley ships, you know, and it was a little like that, you know, you just, instead of rowing, I was drawing storyboards of Tinkerbell. And when I got laid off during the Great Recession, they basically came to us at Disney and said, you know, these jobs are going away and they aren't coming back. I didn't know what else to do. And I called him from the parking lot of the Burbank studio. And I'm not a teary sort of guy, but I remember distinctly like being teary, talking to him on the phone, as he inexplicably said, well, come to Washington, I'll find something for you on the policy or communications team. But while he was saying that, and I think that's what made me teary because I was grateful. Through my tears, I could see this enormous goofy, because I happened to be on the goofy level of the parking structure. And that was my swan song for LA. I basically drove away from the parking structure and my life in LA. Anyway, I can't remember why I even went there. So forgive me.
Well, it doesn't matter. That was delightful. I want to say that, everyone, think of questions. If people have questions, we're going to get to the Q&A soon. So put them in the little Q&A thing, but we're going to talk a little more. I just want to say this book brings politics alive in such a wonderful way. I'm not a political wonk like you are, Eric. I don't really understand all this stuff, but you make it so legible, so coherent. You make redistricting fascinating. And I wonder if that was something you set out to do, or if that just was like, you know, a natural side effect of telling this story.
Well, I don't have a lot of skills, but I have that skill. And I think it's because politics and law and government is definitely plan B for me. Like, it's not, I wanted to be drawn. So I was pulled into this world as like an outsider, and so I do think I think I'm not bad at translating it for people that aren't particularly interested in it, because to begin with, I'm not particularly interested in it. I'd rather be talking about our heroes like Ed Sorel or R.O. Bleckman or Roz Chast or you, than Sam Rayburn or Lady Bird Johnson. I end up, it's like so I think I'm pretty good at translating it, or at least, maybe that sounds too patting myself on the back, but
well, no, that's a real skill. I mean, you can be good at politics or law without being able to explain it to other people. It is a skill, and it's just a wonderful aspect of this book.
Right, right.
Well, I love that you mentioned Ed Sorel, because I was just thinking of him today, and how you're somehow, there's a similar quality in your work, a similar kind of smart line that you guys both have. There's somehow intelligence in the line itself.
And his line is so wildly fluid, and then it comes together perfectly, like it. And I just bring him up. I don't even know whether he's a member of the Society of Illustrators, but I think of him as being, I think of the institution hosting this event as being like perfect for all those pushpin studio people who are who definitely are my my real heroes. Those Village Voice cartoonists, and everybody who was a little subversive and not at all cowed by authority. They're who I think is cool.
I just want to ask a little bit about the drawing before we go to the Q&A.
Yeah.
I mean, the drawing is amazing, but I love your color. I love this kind of simplified, I think probably deceptively simple color technique. Can you talk a little bit about how you came up with that?
Yeah, I guess I came up with that sort of organically. It's there are better cartoonists out there. You are one of them, but
I'm just going to show some.
Well, you are. But
just to see the color.
I did realize that color, just has a visceral way of conveying a mood that can allow you, obviously, if you've been listening to me, and Alison, you've been listening to me for a lot of years, like, I'm Gabby, and I want to over explain everything. And the beauty to me about color is that I can shut up for a minute and still convey a mood. And so there's so much about, what I wanted to do was take people into this world this, and I think that's what we all do as cartoonists. We bring people into like an alternative universe that sort of exists in our head. My alternative universe is similar, talking about the real world. I'm not talking about superheroes or other planets, but it still looks differently in my head than it exists in the real world. And, in Boston in particular lends itself to, 101 versions of red. Every time the light hits a sidewalk in Boston on a different day, you've got a different Boston. And that inspired me when I was drawing. So, and actually, and similarly with DC, which I basically think of as sandstone colored. So how to make that interesting, because it's there are infinite variations of that, even if you're operating in a pretty small band.
It looks to me like a limited palette. Was it, in fact, or did you have infinite colors that you were using?
No, I stuck to. I kept cheating. I mean, it was supposed to be
kept
like,
adding more.
Yeah, I would sit down and I would say, like, you are going to draw this chapter in these 4 colors, and you will not be allowed to add a second color, or a 5th color. And then you'd be like, yeah, but wouldn't it be cool if Nancy Pelosi was wearing like a green shoes? And so there was a lot of like setting down the law, and then breezing by it.
Well, it works really well. I think, like, to do it full color, I mean, obviously would have taken the rest of your life, but also wouldn't have worked as well with your incredibly detailed drawings, and using these, washes of color that go over whole areas of drawing. I think that's really effective at just tying it together really nicely.
Yeah. Should I so it's 7:48. Should I read the second?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm letting us go on.
No. The pieces. Do we have time for me to do the second reading, or should we go to questions?
Oh, the reading. I'm sorry, I forgot about the reading.
No.
I think
definitely have time.
We have time. Okay,
Yeah.
let me go to the second, which is fairly short.
Sorry about that.
So no, not at all. Oh, bear with me. Sorry. Forgive me. One more second. Sorry, Alison.
No worries.
I'll be right there.
Just take a breath.
Yeah. Okay.
I can't wait for more reading. It's so fun.
Do you need any help, Eric? Or
yeah, I have it up on my screen, but not in my like it should say it under basic.
yeah, it's not showing up there.
I got it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Just like you taught me, Lindsay. Okay. And now. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Great. Okay. 1980, fault line. In the legislature, he also worked to permit prostitution within an area downtown referred to by everyone, from sex workers to blue bloods, as the combat zone, and to legalizing at least some gambling. He thought of his aunts, hardworking Bayonne family woman who'd take bus trips every 3 months down to Atlantic City to play the slots. Rich folks could kick back at their country clubs or summer homes, but for many, gambling was one of life's few pleasures. He thought it was elitist to deny their right to indulge it. just like he thought people had the right to adult entertainment, if that was their thing. But when he introduced legislation to decriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana, some of his colleagues just lost it. Mr. Speaker, if it's not prostitution, if it's not fornication, if it's not support for the rights of the homos, then it's legalizing dope. When, in the name of all that is holy, is a gentleman from Back Bay going to stop? But he was never at a loss for words on the floor. Mr. Speaker, it's true. I've introduced bills related to pornography, gambling, prostitution, adultery, homosexuality, and now marijuana. But I will make this commitment to my colleague. I'll keep trying until I find something that he likes to do. Donors, party elders like Father Drinan, and local power brokers gravitated towards Barney. I should say that there was a crusading liberal priest, a Catholic priest named Father Drinan. The church insisted in 1980 that Father Drinan quit Congress, opening up a seat. Barney decided to run for the seat. Eventually, other liberals dropped out, leaving Barney in a one-on-one matchup with a conservative Democrat who took to the airwaves with attack ads. My friends, the 4th District needs a congressman who will champion small-town New England values, and those don't include porno, pot, or prostitution. Just days before the primary, the city's cardinal weighed in, having engineered Father Drinan's ouster from Congress. The idea that he might be replaced by this slobby Jew, this promoter of all manner of venality, well, that was just intolerable. These are blood-drenched times. It is a sin for a Catholic to vote for any candidate who supports abortion, period. So he wrote to every Catholic voter in the district to make damn sure it didn't happen. Make certain the newspapers print this. The Cardinal's letter put Barney on the defensive at first. Your fat boyfriend's screwed now. Within days, though, sentiment swung the other way. Hey, I'm a good Catholic, but maybe the church ought to concern itself with what's going on under its own skirts, if you get my meaning. So now we're going to zoom ahead to 1985, Hustle. Having been reelected to Congress, he went on a diet, began exercising, even got contacts. But even this new improved Barney remained pretty lonely at home, which is where he sat on a Sunday at the end of March, 1985, his 45th birthday. Outside, DC was its typical springtime miasma of damp, cold, and drizzle. He fished around his gym bag for a free gay rag he grabbed after working out earlier and flipped through it. He'd been consuming great journalism since he was a kid. So why was he bothering with the Washington Blade when he could be reading the Washington Post? Because sometimes he needed to remind himself who he really was, because they don't print stories about Kaposi sarcoma in the Washington Post, or why it's impolite to talk about AIDS at Georgetown parties. He flipped the paper over, scrutinized the classifieds. Most held no interest. Young Masseur, please call 202 Happy End. Tall, athletic Bavarian, available for beer garden und Lederhosenfang. Feeling frisky, 75 but look 90. Gotta have a sense of humor, boys. Gay white male professor, 45, 6 feet, 150 pounds, basically perfect, looking for the same. Finally, one caught his eye. Exceptionally good looking, personable, muscular athlete, available, hot bottom plus large endowment equals good times. He picked up the phone, a tool he wielded commandingly at work, but held doubtfully now, and punched in the phone number. An engaging, regular guy-sounding voice answered, said he was booked for today, but could do tomorrow. Tomorrow was Tomorrow was Monday, a different world from Barney's lonely Sundays. He booked anyway. And a day later, he opened the door to his apartment and met a guy calling himself Steve. He liked the guy's looks. Steve strode inside, made a crack about the decor. Nice place, kinda, and shed his clothes. The guy's confidence was a turn on. So was his appearance. So you work on the Hill? Where do you ask? Stack of Federal Registers by the couch. His nice physique compensated for the fact that the sex was a little perfunctory, kind of like a pilot with a checklist. Yeah, not so much into kissing. Should we get right down to it? He gave the guy $85 for services rendered, thanked him for stopping by, and closed the door, satisfied. I'm straight, actually. Doing it with guys is really just a money thing to pay for school or maybe my own business. He saw Steve again and again and again. Anyway, I didn't want to go into, I know I'm sort of, jumping in and jumping out. But I wanted to introduce the scandal without going through the 30 pages of it.
No, that was great to touch on that and to show how, how easily that he just fell into that.
Yeah.
We are getting close to the end though, and here's a question from the Q&A. What was the most challenging aspect of writing this book for you?
Well, I found, as I'm sure you have found, that doing a graphic memoir, graphic novel, graphic biography is challenging, period, and a little Sisyphean, if that's a word.
It's very hard to convey to normal people how much work it is.
Right. But I'll tell you one funny story comes to my head. We've talked about the fact that in my mind, forgive me, I really do think of it as if I'm filming it. I'm not saying like I want it to be realistic, but if a setting, if the Boston Common looks a certain way in a 90-degree night, in the summer, I sort of want to convey that. And in the same, one thing that was difficult for me was a lot of politics goes on in these fairly anodyne spaces, conference rooms. It's not all these beautiful marble showpieces you see in Capitol Hill. Even on Capitol Hill, it's mostly not like that. So one thing, Barney started his career in a very unlikely way as the chief of staff to the mayor of Boston, this young Jewish kid from Jersey, who ended up really running day-to-day operations for the Irish political machine at the time. That's not quite doing justice to Kevin White, who was the mayor, but anyway, that meant drawing a lot of the interior of Boston City Hall. And I really wanted to get that right. And there aren't a lot of pictures of the interiors of government buildings. You see people outside or you see people in a ceremonial setting somewhere. But I wanted to convey what it was like to be in a shitty office, on the 5th floor with no AC, or where they hadn't washed the windows in 10 years because the budget didn't allow it. And that was hard, but I did my best. And 3 weeks after I sent the book to Henry Holt, a very famous documentarian whose name I can never keep the name in my head, but he's the person, he did a documentary film called Tittycut Follies about mental health in New England. He came out with a big national splash of a movie called City Hall, which was 6 hours of Boston City Hall, the same Boston City Hall, the very same buildings, 6 hours of material of what's
so funny
sub-basement conference room looked like in the whole structure. And that was challenging. So.
Wow. Eric, that's so funny. I know we're over time.
Oh, and somebody just, Frederick Weissman. Thank you, Vivian.
Oh, okay.
And Brody Fox just said the same thing. Exactly, Weissman. Thank you all for correcting me with that.
That exact same thing happened to me when I was writing Fun Home. I had this scene of the New York City piers that I needed to put near the end of my book. And I was spending a lot of time online. There was amazing photographs, but I could never quite find the view or angle I needed. And as soon as I sent it all off to the publisher, I discovered this amazing documentary. It's just, yeah, hours of just walking along the piers, showing all these crumbling structures.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever get over that. So really that, you know, if I have to quick answer, that was the most challenging thing. The most challenging thing is being okay emotionally, having experienced that. So.
Okay, well, we're over our time. Eric, this was so fun. And everybody, this book is so wonderful. I mean, you can tell, you got to go get it. And it's going to make you feel better about things. I assure you.
Alison, you're the best. You know, I think that. I think you're the best person. I also think you're the best cartoonist. So, you know, I'm great. I'm grateful.
Thank you. It was an honor to do this with you. And
thank you.
I'm so glad you finally, I know you've been working on this for a very long time. So I'm glad it's out.
Me too. Me too. On to the next one. Yes. Hopefully. So. Lindsay, so how do we close out?
Yep, I was just gonna say, you know, thank you guys so much, and I'm gonna click the little end button here. Okay. So thank you guys.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Alison,